Hello, everyone. This is Jason Chain with the Augustine Podcast. Welcome today. Today is episode 2, and we have with us David Smith, a very interesting character. One I'm sure you'll come to love, and it's been a crazy adventure how I've gotten to know David over these years, and I hope for him to spread some of his wisdom and his humor with us today. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So, David, a lot of the things that I hear you say have to do with your father.
Yeah, my dad was real quotable. That was like one of his big things. He always told me that pretty much everything his dad told him, he was telling me, and that's how like wisdom lives on. So the classic like storybook, stories get passed down from generations to generations. And so the way I keep my dad alive is by, spreading the things that he told me to other people.
Did you where did you grow up?
I grew up in Newport News, Virginia, which is like a small coastal city in Southeast Virginia. Really, the only thing you would know it for is we have the largest shipyard in the country. So like all your nuclear submarines, war weapons, like all of that comes out of there.
Mm-hmm. And you come from a family, how many brothers and sisters? You have one sister?
Yeah, so I have a twin sister, and then I have an older brother.
What's it like having a twin?
I mean, I used to always joke that the best part about having a twin sister was her friends, but it's really kind of like exactly what they say. I mean, my mom has an identical twin, and that's like the movie thing that you see where they're like totally in sync. They talk every day. They really, I don't know that they can exist without each other. For me and my sister, it was always kind of like love-hate. Like growing up, it was like, I love her, I'm her protector, like all of those things, but I hate her. She drove me crazy, and I know I drove her crazy. So it ended up being like very codependent and kind of crazy towards the end. But now it's like probably the healthiest relationship I have.
You and your sister.
Yeah.
So grew up in Newport News, and your mom and dad were together when you were a kid. Did they split? How did that happen?
So my mom and dad divorced when I was like 3 or 4. I only have like a couple of memories of them together, but there's a bunch of stories. So they split when I was like 3 or 4. My dad remarried within like a year. And my mom kind of had a bunch of real tumultuous relationships that I remember growing up. She had like, when they first split, she had like a bunch of boyfriends, if I remember correctly. And then she had like a steady boyfriend for like 7 years. And then it was kind of like the chaos after that.
After that breakup?
Yeah, it was like kind of what it was in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Kind of went back to that where she was like dating this guy and then dating this guy. And some of them were very volatile. There was like some domestic issues and things of that nature growing up.
And so you were the only male in the house that was the family.
I mean, I have an older brother, but he really has always kind of kept to himself. He won't like this comment, but he'll probably never see this anyway. So he very much reminded me of like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. He was just kind of like into, comics and fantasy, and that was like his coping mechanism. I don't think he's ever smoked a cigarette, drank a beer, done any drugs, anything like that. He was very just to himself. Yeah. And he's still very much like that. Whereas me and my sister like took the chaos of like my mom was by herself and working all the time. And, our grandma was around and her sister was around. But like we pretty much had the ability to do whatever we wanted. And so we did.
Where did you, like as a child, what did you see as like, how did you fit in with other kids? What did you do? Did you feel popular? Did you feel out of place? How did you fit in in the town you grew up in when you were at school?
In school, I always felt like out of place. So I was always like looking for something to belong to, whether it was the outcast or the gangsters or like whatever it was. I was like always looking for something to fit into, and I was able to like be like a chameleon for the most part and like jump from thing to thing, but I never like felt like I belonged. Like
even like say elementary school?
As far back as I can remember, especially like elementary school, like I had like one really good friend like in elementary school, and eventually, like we fell apart. He went one way and I went another, but for the most part, like I had like a core group of friends, but even with them, I felt like I was there, but I wasn't supposed to be there. like they were going to figure it out any moment.
Oh, like an imposter type.
Yeah, like I'm just there, but I was never part of. If that makes sense.
Do you think that's the truth, or do you think it's how you felt, or do you think it's both?
Somewhere in the middle. The truth usually lies in the middle. I mean, I still feel that way today. Like, with the exception of like AA, pretty much everywhere I go, I feel like, am I really supposed to be here? Do people really like me? Like, do I really like me? It's like something I've always struggled with. But I found like through doing the work and working with others that I found like how to like identify that false sense. Because at the end of the day, even if that is real, like I'm a pretty big fan of me. So it doesn't like really matter what other people think. I just do the best I can in any situation.
How do you think you got to that place of acceptance and love for yourself?
A lot of therapy, a lot of trauma work, a lot of 12-step work. I mean, I think like diving headfirst into like the 12-step communities like really showed me that I could belong, that like the thing that was stopping me was me. And a lot of that like foundation was laid in treatment, like I still felt that way in treatment, but there was a moment where I remember vividly being like, I'm just going to go all out. Right. And I'm never going to see these people again. So like, how free do I want to be? Like, I'm just going to go for it. And that ended up not being true. I saw lots of those people moving forward. Some of them I still talk to. But it was really just like diving into the faith and like through the fear. Like when I was in Richmond, I remember this like therapist I was talking to was explaining to me about it. I was telling her about my anxiety or whatever. And it basically told me the only way to like get through anxiety is to like lean into it, like to look at, whatever it is you're anxious, right? What's the worst possible thing, right? If I do this, then this happens, and then the world explodes, right? And just to do it and then see what happens, because it's never the thing that we think it is. Like the worst case scenario almost never happens.
In childhood, did you have that same type of anxiety? Is that pretty base level for how you experience the world?
I never knew that this is what it was, but I never felt safe, right? I always felt like I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know what was supposed to be going on, and I didn't know what could happen at any moment, and I think my way of dealing with that was to create more chaos, right? To like break rules and be mischievous and get into trouble and get into fights and steal and lie and cheat and, do drugs and drink and all those things. But like, I never remember feeling like safe. Like serenity. I never felt serenity or peace or comfort or any of those. I always felt like something was going to happen, like at any moment. The other shoe was going to drop, right? That's what they always say. Like that's what I was always waiting for, is like something crazy to happen. Sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. But I was always in this like fear. Like,
give me some of your family history. So your mom and dad's parents, where they come from?
My mom was born in Virginia, I believe. My dad was also born in Virginia. So my mom's side of the family all like stems from New York. So my mom had like 6 or 7 brothers. Her parents were together. Her dad was in the armed forces. I think he did a couple of different things. Merchant seaman was like the big one. And then her mom like was a stay-at-home mom. Deeper than that, like I have no idea. Like nobody in my family seems to have any idea about my grandparents' parents on that side of the family. It's always been kind of a mystery, which is kind of cool because you can just make up your own story. But then, like I said, my mom has an identical twin sister, and I believe a younger brother, and then 3 older brothers, one of whom is deceased now. And then my dad it was the baby. So he had an older brother and an older sister, and his parents, well, again, his mom was like a stay-at-home mom, and his dad was a businessman. Like he came back from the war, the World War II, and he opened an automotive business, which like specialized in air conditioning at the time, which was very niche. Now everyone does air conditioning, but in 1945 or 1950, whenever it was, like nobody did that. That was like their specialty. And so he was like kind of like a big like figure in the community. Like everybody knew who William Smith was, like, and And then everybody knew my dad was like kind of a drunk. You know, my dad told me that this is one of my dad lines. He said, I only got drunk once. It was from 1967 to 1998 or whatever it was. And I always kind of resonated with that. You know, I only got drunk once. It was from 1999 to 2020. Like, it just never ended.
So your mom's side of the family's French, right?
I believe.
You believe so?
That's what they say.
At least the name sounds French. And then your dad, so your grandfather came back from World War II?
Yeah.
World War II. And then where's the Smith family from? Where are his parents from? What part of the world did they immigrate from and come here to the United States?
I believe Europe, like somewhere in like England, I think, but I could be mistaken. I've never been one for like the family history. It wasn't like lore, you know, like it wasn't really talked about a whole lot. And if it was, I was probably already high and not paying attention. I know that my grandmother, my dad's mom, grew up on like a tobacco farm. So that much I do know. I know my grandfather grew up dirt poor. He used to always talk about the younger generation, you know, how ungrateful they are. He said, when I was your age, I got an apple for Christmas. Half of it was rotten, and I was grateful to have it. You know, like it was that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But apart from that, like I don't really know their history.
How many years did you have with your grandfather?
I want to say about 16 probably. I want to say
your first 16
yeah,
years.
I think he died in 2003, 2004, somewhere in there.
How much time did you get to spend with him?
My dad, so my parents were divorced, right? So my dad remarried, but we always went with him to his parents' house when he would get us on the weekends. So like every weekend for pretty much my entire childhood. My grandma was like one of those people that like would fix cook anything. Like she would solve your problems by making you a meal and talking to you about the Bible or the good old days or whatever, you know. And my grandfather was kind of like stoic by that point. He wasn't super involved, but he was there. He would chime in and he would say this and that. But a lot of times he'd just be sitting in his chair, reading the paper, watching NASCAR. He wouldn't watch television with the sound on because the commercials, they weren't going to sell him something, you know?
Yeah. Did he ever talk to you about World War II?
Not me, but he talked to my dad a little bit about it. He had a couple stories and he saw some things. Like he liberated concentration camps, and like I remember like overhearing some conversations between him and my dad about like some of the things that he saw.
Yeah.
And that's where my dad got like my dad used to always tell me that you'd be amazed what keeps you up at night. And like when I was in my addiction, I'd always tell him you'd be amazed at what doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, like it's never the thing that you think it is, right? The mistake that you make isn't the one that like keeps you up at night. It's the one you never even thought of. It just pops in there, just like, wish I could do that over. You know, I wish I hadn't have said that. I wish I hadn't acted that way. And so I think that was one of those cases where we were both right.
Yeah. And in that, when I think about the anxiety that you talk about experiencing as a kid, the always waiting for the other shoe to drop. In my experience, with generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, things being passed from one generation to the next, I think going through war, seeing the atrocities that your grandfather saw, probably in some ways gets passed down to us. We get to see that.
Yeah, I think it was definitely prevalent with my dad, you know, and I think the things that are normal, like to one person, aren't normal to other people. You know, I always thought my experiences were just run of the mill, but then when I meet people, you know, I've found over time that the experiences aren't so normal. It's the feelings attached to them that everybody has. You know, my dad was like chronically depressed. Like he would lay in bed for days at a time, and he would only get up and do things when he had to. And, you know, and that was after he quit drinking. So I remember him telling me like stories about like he was like a sad drunk, you know, and he said he was always like wanting to kill himself, you know, and my grandfather like told him one time, like, you know, enough of this is enough. You know, if you're going to do it, this is how you do it. He said, make sure you put the gun here. Don't put it here because you're going to be scared and then you're going to miss and you're going to be a vegetable. And that's not fair to your poor mama. And so I think, you know, my grandfather said he was only depressed once, you know, and it was in the midst of the war and he didn't want to get out of bed. And they were like, well, get out of bed or we'll shoot you. And he said he was never depressed again, you know, but I don't know how much of that is like tough
Yeah.
old school, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But I definitely think like some of that is in there. Like it's embedded in your DNA.
So your grandfather has the family business. Your dad's supposed to follow in that.
Yeah, but he didn't. Essentially, he just had a job for life that he sometimes did. My uncle, his older brother, was the one that did that. Like he took it on. Like he made it what it was when they sold it. My grandfather carried it for like 30 or 40 years, and my uncle carried it the last like 30 years.
Was your uncle the firstborn, or was he the
Second.
second? So your dad was actually the.
My dad's the youngest. My
Okay,
aunt's
that's right,
the
your dad.
oldest. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I'm going to get this wrong and they're going to tell me about it.
And your dad passed away when?
2018.
Were you sober yet at that time?
No.
No.
I was living with him. I spent the last like 6 months of his life living with him. And so I look back on that as being a blessing, but I also don't believe there's a universe in which like my dad lives and I get sober.
Why do you believe that?
Because my dad wouldn't like full on enable me, but he was always like safety net. Like I could always get out of things with my dad. Like if I ended up in jail, he would come get me out of jail. He might not bail me out, but he was going to come get me. If I wrecked a car or lost a car or damaged, these things, he would always like help me get another one. And I was always like, to some degree, looking at him and seeing like, well, he made it work. Like I can make it work. Like, he never got full on sober. He quit drinking, but then he still smoked weed and then he did other things. But I don't think I would have ever been like, I need to get sober like this. I don't think it would have ever got to the point that it got to.
And why did your dad quit drinking?
Probably because it was going to kill him. The story he says is that, he was having like medical complications with like his liver or his kidney, or he's taking some new medication or something. And his doctor was like, you got to quit drinking for 60 days or 90 days or whatever it was so that we can get like accurate results on these tests we're running. And what he says is that after those 60 days, he saw how happy his second wife was and he just couldn't go back, which is super romantic. I don't know how true it was, but
yeah. Did you, like, what was y'all's relationship like?
mentor, best friend, confidant, running mate to some degree. Like my dad never did any like drugs or drinking with me until I was like 18. That was like one of his hard rules is like, I can't let you do this. I have an obligation as a parent. You can't do this stuff around me. I can't do it with you. All of I'm responsible for you. Like the thing that you should do. But essentially, once I was grown, I was grown. Like once we crossed that imaginary 18-year-old line, we were like able to be formal friends instead of just father son.
Yeah.
When we'd always been like good friends.
And you'd always looked up to him.
Yeah, my dad was like the king of high potential. Like he didn't need to like waste away like just doing the bare minimum. Like he could have been a lawyer or a philosopher or a professor. He could have done anything. He just didn't. Like he was never put into a position where he had to. And when he was put into those positions, he didn't feel like he was valued. And so he was like, I don't need to do this.
Yeah. Do you think that's a product of his father, or do you think that just was something that he told himself about himself? Why do you think he gave up in that way, or he didn't feel the need to do that or prove it?
I think it's a combination of like living in his dad's shadow. Like Bill Smith was like a huge staple member of the community, and like classic enabling. Like they weren't going to make them. They would draw lines that they weren't going to hold. And my mom's side of the family is like the very like public, like argue, like they don't really like keep everything under the rug. Whereas my dad's side of the family was more like upper middle class, so they weren't going to like air their dirty laundry in public. Like if you were looking at them from the outside, you'd be like, what a staple family. They're so well put together. They go to church. Like they're everything that you're supposed to be. They own a business. They give back, like all of that. But there was lots of things that they never said,
What did you ever get the feeling that secret keeping was a way to live?
Every message I got like growing up was conflicted. Like, so on one side, right? Like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. And then on the other side, like my mom was very outspoken about everything, really. Like, my dad wouldn't like badmouth my mom, right? But he would always like wrap it up with a bow of like, well, I know your mom says stuff about me, right? But my mom would, you know what I mean? And she would basically, say that anything he says is a lie type thing. But it's like he never said anything. So like my childhood was like my mom. I don't think my mom's an alcoholic. I used to, but I don't really know. It's not for me to know. But growing up, my mom was like drank a lot excessively, and she would get drunk and she would go on these rants about my good for nothing drunk father, who I never saw drunk. So it was very confusing. Like growing up, I'm like, so my dad's an alcoholic. He's drunk all the time, but I've never seen him drunk. And the lady that's telling me this is drunk while she's telling me this. So it was very confusing.
So you didn't see your dad drink, so he wouldn't do that with you, but he also wouldn't do it around you.
He quit drinking like when I was like shortly after they got divorced. So, and then he never really went back to drinking. So like I saw him like, we smoked weed and stuff together later in life. And I figured out in my teenage years that there was like, that he was smoking weed, cause like my friends were smoking weed and I was smoking weed and I was like, oh, dad's car smells like weed,
Yeah. I had the same experience. When I finally started smoking weed, I was like, oh, that's what Uncle Ronnie's truck smells
right.
like. I finally knew it. My whole life, it had just the oddest smell. And I'd go everywhere with him when I was a kid, but I never knew that's what it was until I did. And it all made sense.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was. Like I remember, I'm not going to name names on this, but I remember the first time that like I smoked crack and I like smelled the crack and I was like, oh, this smells like my childhood. You know what I mean? Like, and I liked the smell. Like other people were like, oh, I hate the way it smells. And I was like, this feels like some place in childhood that like, maybe I did feel safe at that point in time or something. I don't know. It was the oddest thing. Like the smell was like, I was like, I like this smell.
Well, it's definitely like a trauma tie. So that sensory experience of that smell brings you to a place of, say, like nostalgia or safety or just familiarity. So you felt at home.
Yeah.
Whereas most people would be freaked out by that. It actually felt comforting.
Yeah, it was very like, I was like, oh, okay. Like this isn't
Could
bad.
you tie it to what it actually was too, or it was like the feeling of home?
I mean, I know what it was too, but I don't want to say here.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so you had experience with it. You just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah, it clicked.
Yeah.
One of those moments.
What do you feel like was the moment in which when were you first kind of seeing yourself for what you were becoming?
Probably like somewhere in the last year that I was in like my hometown. Like the last year I spent there, things that I had crossed so many like lines at this point that I had established for myself where it was like, oh, if I ever end up here, then I'll do something about it. And by this point I was like 7 down there, and every time I would get to like a new place, I'd be like, oh, this is fine. This is fine. But now I was like, I remember like driving around, like doing cocaine and drinking whiskey with this guy I was running with. And we had been running together for a while. And I just remember this like deep sadness of being like, nothing is mine. Like nobody knows where I am. And just like, I remember like praying, even though I didn't like really believe in God, I was just like, please let us get caught or die. Like, I don't see any other way out of this. Like, if we don't end up in prison or dead, like this is just going to go on forever. And that was the first time that thought was like terrifying to me.
What followed up that?
Eventually, like we split, and I found this lady in the night that like became like my best friend, who we just like drove each other crazy. I'm pretty sure both of us hated each other, but we ended up like ripping and running for a while. And it was just one of these things where she was doing things she didn't want to do, and I was doing things I didn't want to do. And it was just for drugs and alcohol and like hotel rooms and sometimes not hotel rooms. And I was just like, I was convincing myself that like my problem was the situation, right? So like I was spending a lot of time like trying to figure out how to like get out of this situation, because like it was all the external stuff, right? If this hadn't happened, then this wouldn't happen. And this guy ripped me off and this girl ripped me off and my sister screwed me over and like all of these things. And so like in a moment of desperation, like in a blackout, like I don't remember doing this, but I know it happened. I like called my sister and I was like, I'm fucking done. Like, get me out of here. Help me. And then the next day she was like, we're almost there. And I was like, how do you know where I am? Like, and they took me to a place in Richmond, and that's what like really started my journey for like recovery.
Mm-hmm. And what drugs, what alcohol, like what did it look like for you? Were you taking a bunch of things, few things?
By this point, like I was drinking around the clock, right? Because I had discovered about a year or two ago, shortly after my dad died, I started like getting really into cocaine because it was basically a drinking enhancement. Like I could drink forever. And when the Coke ran out, you would just get hit with all the alcohol in your body and you would pass out. And so for like over a year, I did like an 8-ball of cocaine like every day, like just around the clock. And then eventually like my nose started to have problems, and like I'd smoked crack, here and there in between there. And I was like, we could just smoke crack. It'll be the same thing. And I'm here to tell you, it is in fact not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so by that point,
baking soda makes a big difference.
Yeah. By that point, we were like smoking tons of crack and drinking around the clock and just, doing all sorts of like illegal activities to fund that lifestyle. And it was getting weird. Things were getting weird. People were chasing us that didn't exist. Like we were getting kicked out of hotels. Like, we're meeting like worse and worse people, doing worse and worse things, like, and it was just escalating.
Well, when the top floor is the second floor, it's not a hotel, it's a motel.
Right.
But so give me a story. Give me a story, a crack story.
So this one time we were in some motel and we've been smoking crack for like days. And eventually, like, I came to the conclusion that the people that we were with, like, because we were trying to do a deal with, were like setting us up, right? And they were going to kidnap the girl, And so like I freaked out and I like took off, and I think I like called the cops on myself, and then eventually like the cops found me, and I think they just assumed that like I was just making everything up and it was just me, but I didn't have any drugs on me. So they were pretty much like, don't call us again. And I was like, cool, good deal, And so like, I just kind of like took off, and eventually the girl like found me and we just started it all over again. She was like, no, this is what really happened. And I was like, I don't think that's what happened. Like, but that just kind of went on for a while. I mean, at the end, like, like I'll never forget like when I left to go to treatment. We had been smoking crack all night, drinking, and she was a heroin addict, so she had been doing heroin. I didn't really do a whole lot of heroin at this point. And I'll never forget when my sister pulled up, like trying to stall my sister so that like I could get one more hit of crack when the guy got there. And eventually I just gave up, and I looked at the girl and I was like, the room's paid for till Thursday. I got to go. Like, I don't know what else to tell you.
And your sister came and got you, and that started everything?
That started everything.
Yeah, family comes through for you sometimes.
My sister, like to sometimes to her own detriment, has like always been my biggest fan. Yeah. I don't always know why. Sometimes even now I don't know why. I remember when I got sober this time, I was just trying to do all the things that they said to do, like fully immersed in everything. And I was trying to be like humble, because before I'd been like, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Let me make amends. Look at me. Like, yay, I'm doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing as a 30-something-year-old man. And I remember I would always like get the chips and send my sister a picture of the AA chips. And I got the 6-month chip, right? And I was getting ready to start working in treatment, and I sent my sister that chip, and she was like, you are a miracle. And I was like, no, and I'm just like doing what they told me to do and all of that. And I like thought about that all night, and I prayed on it and I meditated on it. And I really just kind of decided that she was right. Like this is a miracle. Like I should be dead or in jail like 100 times over. And I think really from that day forward, I've always like looked at every day as like a miracle. Like I'm not supposed to be here. So let me like do something with it.
And that attitude of doing something with it or making the most of it, how's that manifested in your life? Like, what does it look like today? What's your power and purpose?
To help others, and like when I'm able to help them. I think really it's opened me up to like an open-mindedness and a willingness that I've never had. Right? I never had in life the like open-mindedness to like just do something without knowing what it was or how it was going to directly benefit me. And now I'm able to like look at it like experiences and see them and go for it and be like, I don't know how this is going to play out, like find that intuitive thought, that intuitive feeling that, okay, I'm supposed to do this, right? I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to do it. And anything worth doing is worth doing well. Mm-hmm. So like when I started in treatment, like I didn't want to work in treatment, but the guy I looked up to was like, you should do this, right? You dare to be unpopular. You say the things that need to be said. You don't hold back. You're not cruel about it. Like you're supposed to do this. And so I just decided like, okay, like I'll do it. I talked to, the sponsor and the therapist and the circle and they were like, yeah, do it. And so what I decided was I'd give it a year, just do it for a year, see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not going anywhere at the end of the year, go do something else. And at the end of the year, like they offered me a different position, and I was same thing. I was like, ugh, I don't know if I want to do that, but they were like, you're supposed to do this. And maybe they just say that to everybody. I don't know. I doubt it. But I was like, okay, so I'll give it a year. And, it was like less than a year and they were like, do something else, like do this other position. And I was like, okay, give it a year. So, I mean, everything's been like, give it a year. And I mean, it's been like 4.5 years I've been sober at this point. And I've accomplished more in that 4.5 years than like the other 32 put together.
Right.
Like I was like, when I got to Richmond, like chasing recovery, I remember like talking to this lady and she was like telling me all the things I just said essentially. And she was like, well, what about your driver's license? You could get your driver's license back. And I was like, I will never get a driver's license again. I'm never going to quit drinking. Like, so I'll just quit driving. I was one of those people. Like you get a DUI. Oh, I'm not supposed to drive. Like that's the solution.
Yeah. Not about stopping drinking.
No, that wasn't an option, and that was the thing that broke me is like on the last relapse, I was like convinced. I was convinced to a man that I could like drink and not do drugs, right? Because the drugs were the problem and the people that came with the drugs were the problem. And it was not me and it was not drinking, right? And sure as shit, I drank and immediately was like, we should smoke crack. That's what we should do. And that broke me. And so when I like actually opened my mind to like, if I was wrong about this, I was probably wrong about other things. And so like, let's go for it.
Did you have an experience where you feel like you pushed all your chips in the middle? Did you go for it completely or were you still holding things back? How would you feel like your effort was once you got into that work?
I felt like I went all for it. I had like laid strong groundwork because at this point, by the time I ended up in treatment for the last time, I had been in treatment for like 12 out of 14 months, in a place in Richmond and then down here in Florida. And I remember like coming out of the detox and like talking to my therapist about like how I did everything you people said to do and it didn't work. And I remember her just breaking it down like line by line, like, well, what about this? Did you do this? And I was like, well, sort of, not really. Like, did you talk to your sponsor? Well, I mean, I had a sponsor. I never called him because I knew what he was going to say, and I'd already decided to drink. Did you continue with therapy? And I was like, well, no, but it was Zoom. So it was your fault, because COVID. It was like, did you go to meetings? Well, no, it was Zoom. And I'm not going to go to Zoom meetings. Like, did you pray? And I was like, how am I supposed to? This was the one that like really opened the doors. I was like, how am I supposed to pray? There is no God. Like, what am I supposed to pray to? And she was just kind of like, so in all reality, you did nothing we said to do.
Yeah.
And I kept fighting her. And at the end of the conversation, she was like, I'm not going to work harder for this than you are. And I remember feeling challenged. And I remember laying in the bed that night, looking at the top bunk and being like, nobody works harder than me. All right, let's do it. And from that moment forward, I just started praying. And I started like taking all the prayers we did, the 3rd-step prayer, the 7th-step prayer, the set aside prayer. And I stopped like just chanting them, like everybody did, just going through the motions. And instead I just started making personal versions of it in my head that I would say before everything. And the biggest one was like, God, let me have a new experience. Like, let me have the experience I'm supposed to have. Because up until that point, like, I'd never prayed for anything besides like, get me out of this cop car, or like, let me win the lottery, or selfish things like that. And that really like changed everything for me. I didn't know it, but it was like within weeks of that, people were like, something's different about you. And what it was for me was like the person I became was like the person that delusional me thought I was already. So it was like hard to see. I was like, I've always been this way. And the more I would like, I always say that all spiritual growth happens in reflection. Yeah. So like the more I would reflect on it, the more I would see like, oh, I was kind of like mean to that person and selfish and rude. And like the first like real growth in like prayer for me was like with like character defects, right? Like getting the awareness around things, because I don't think God just like removes them. Like God gives me the awareness around them. And so we used to always like gossip about everybody in the smoke pit. And I remember like praying for the like awareness to not do that anymore because it was harmful. And that was where I first started seeing it. Is like at first I would like engage in the gossip and then be like, ah, shit, I did it again. And then I would like see the gossip happening and like walk away. And then I would like see the gossip happening and like encourage other people not to do that. Like we shouldn't be doing that. Like he's not even here. Like we're really just driving disconnection amongst ourselves. And it just kind of like went from there.
So that was what did you call that, a spiritual experience?
It was all spiritual experiences. Yeah. That was like crazy to me because I thought like magic was happening, or I was still like kind of out of my mind, I think. So I was like, I don't understand what's happening right now. Like, cause that's not me. It's the thing that like everybody would always talk about. Like, that's not me that does these things. You know what I mean? That's the higher power. That's God. And like, I saw it like working in my life. And I was like, I had already like been convinced like the staff like had it work in their life, but they were better than me. Like that wasn't for people like me. And then it started working for me. And I was like, this is kind of crazy.
So that imposter syndrome, or that at least that belief that you kind of held since childhood, like that you weren't what other people were, was still happening to you here or in your recovery journey. But then you started, like you said, you do love yourself. You do believe in you. And it started to kind of manifest. And once you started seeing it in yourself, you held on to it.
Yeah. It started like cracks in the armor, it started like chipping away. And I started to like believe that people actually liked me sometimes, and sometimes I still don't think they do, but.
Where do you think that comes from?
I have no idea, really. I mean, I want to blame my mom, but that also like seems like a cop out, I think I think a lot of it is like the things that I like, the peer groups I exposed myself to, like, and that I was a part of. I never really felt like I fit in my own home, right? Like growing up. So if I didn't fit in there, like I couldn't possibly fit in anywhere else. Like, if I don't feel safe and secure at home, I probably never felt safe and secure anywhere.
Do you think your sister felt that way?
I think she did, but in like a different way. I think with my sister, it was more like I never felt heard. And I know she didn't. I know there were like plenty of times that she didn't feel safe or valued or any of those things, because my sister is like little, and I'm like big, I'm like 6'6", like I've always been tall, never really super big. But my sister and most of the women in my family like make up for their petiteness by being loud. They're loud women, Yeah. And so my sister would like yell and scream and like fight back verbally. And I would like act out in a way that would like draw the attention away from her. Like I'm like doing physical and other like bad behaviors so that like I'm in trouble, not her.
Oh, okay. So you wanted to kind of take up for her, or at least shield that from her.
Yeah, but I never like really knew that's what I was doing until later.
It's like subconscious.
Yeah, like my sister was about to get arrested one time when we were like teenagers over some stuff with her boyfriend. And I remember like being like, oh, my sister's going to get arrested. Like at this point, they've decided they're arresting someone. It doesn't have to be her. And so I don't remember exactly what I did, but I like lashed out at the police officers, and I was like, I'm getting arrested today, not her. And that's what ended up happening was they arrested me for like disorderly conduct or something stupid, but they didn't arrest her. And so it was worth it in my mind.
So in your journey right now, like what's happening for you? Like what are some of the realizations that have happened to you in the past, say, year in your life? Like what's blossoming in your life?
Right now, I think mostly like professional relationships, like professional development has gone a long way. I've struggled with like a personal relationship for the better part of the last year, and I seem to be coming out on the other side of that. But I forgot like some of the things that like made recovery so great over the last couple of years, and I've really like dived back into like fellowship and like events with people. I kind of like isolated myself in this romantic relationship and like work and let a lot of the other things fall off. I stopped like playing basketball and I stopped like doing things that I enjoyed. And I've really just been picking up stuff like that. Like I've been going to concerts, I've been going to hockey games, like just doing the things that keeps the balance going. Like I'm not just going to one meeting a week anymore. Now I'm going to 4 or 5, I'm like really diving back into it and trying to like help other people. Cause for the longest time, like I would put my hand up to like sponsor people, but like it would be like this, like please don't ask, And so now I'm trying to like help people outside of just like the work that we do.
Okay. And amazing things have happened. I've seen a ton of your growth in the time that I've known you. Seen you come from a place of like getting to know us on really odd circumstances. I mean, Sam Davis as well.
Oh yeah.
That story of you getting here, breaking his safe, and then him telling you to come down here, and your family sending you down to St. Augustine, and that experience that you had here. Just to see the growth in you. I can still remember watching you in the gym and how hard you worked out. And I saw that as like, there's not too many people, because I didn't see you as like a workout guy. You didn't come across like as somebody who lived it like a gym rat. But yet when you worked out, you went 100% into it. And I always saw that as like a powerful thing with you. And I saw that like spirit energy within you that was beyond what a lot of people have. I often think that, people who love uppers are a lot of times a little more easy to rile up and get into action than those that don't like uppers. Like those that, a mentor of mine used to always say that, because we worked with different people. We worked with addicts, we worked with alcoholics, we worked with people who love to smoke and shoot meth, we work with people who love to snort and shoot heroin. And I would always kind of notice the difference between the uppers guys and the downers guys. And the downers guys were harder to excite.
Right.
And he told me, he said, Jason, working with opiate addicts is kind of like lighting wet charcoal. It takes a while.
Takes a while, yeah.
Yeah. And my experience with you, and my experience professionally in that regard, and it's not true for everyone, but sometimes there are some commonalities that people have. And watching you in your journey has been really amazing as far as how you've progressed. And some of the things that your dad told you along the way have just blown me away. And I think about what your dad meant to you. And I think about how what your dad didn't do with his life, but how much wisdom he imparted into you and what you've been able to do with it. Because it seems like all the things he taught you were kind of like Mr. Miyagi and Karate Kid. Like your dad taught you stuff that is like some of the sayings he gave to you have been so poignant at this time in your life. Whereas before, I don't know that they always made sense, but he was preparing you. He was preparing you for a life beyond his years. And it's a beautiful thing. Like when you quote your dad, I think, wow, what an amazing, brilliant man he was. Could you ever enlighten us with any of your dad's sayings?
My favorite one that my dad used to say, because like to me, it was like one day at a time, like, duh, like, what else are you going to do? Like, live 2 days at a time. But he used to, whenever I would like be on one or whatever, he'd always just be like, well, son, it's all good till it ain't, and the one that was like so true about my drinking that like everybody saw but me was he would tell me, he'd say, son, when you drink beer, you think stupid shit. He said, but when you drink liquor, you do stupid shit, and he was right. Like, as soon as I would start drinking whiskey, like, I'd be like, whatever the dumb idea was, like, I'd be like, let's do it. Like, yeah. And that's what like really progressed in my drinking is like, it went from like drinking to like, as soon as like I started drinking, like I blacked out every time and everything became a good idea. That's how I ended up doing like all the drugs. Like, I never was like, I still don't like look at myself as a drug guy. Like, I'm an alcoholic that did a bunch of drugs, but, and thank God for that, cause if it wasn't for those drugs, like I would have never got miserable enough. It really accelerated the bottom to the point where I was like, something's got to change, God, he's got so many like that, but those are like the two that like immediately come to mind with my dad.
What do you think he would think of your life right now?
I think this is like the type of thing he always thought that I could do. Like he thought that I could do anything, really. He just saw me. I think he always viewed me like working in restaurants and stuff as like such a waste. It's like, you could do anything and this is what you choose to do. And I was like, yeah, but I'm really good at it, like, and it turns out like I wasn't really good at making pizza. Like, I was really good at like managing people and product and like seeing bigger issues, right? Like, I try to like always think about ripples, like if I do this, this happens, and right on down the road. And so I try to like see, kind of like how you always talk about like 7 generations out, like seeing the decisions we make affect the next 7 generations. And while I don't think I'm that big a picture, I'm like, this decision will affect like the next, you can't just change one thing because it changes everything. Mm-hmm. And so seeing what those changes are going to be and like being prepared for them and knowing like, the old Rumsfeld, like the known knowns and the unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns, like trying to be ready for those things. And I think he thought I could be president or something. He was like a big fan.
I honestly believe you could be president, David. You might not be popular enough to be president with some of your, foibles. Yeah. But, like the work ethic and the determination and the grit that I believe it would take to be president, I wouldn't doubt that you could do it. Not one bit, man. What you brought to this world since you gotten sober has been really amazing to see. The kind of hope and energy that you bring to your professional life and the people that you manage want to fight for you always. And that is a really beautiful thing to watch, knowing the entire genesis of your recovery and seeing how you've been able to turn all those experiences in your life into gold. And the fact that you're always willing to work on yourself, because you still do therapy, right? You still work with a therapist, even though you've obviously had an amazing recovery and turnaround, but you continue to take care of yourself in many ways that you believe in.
Yeah, and she always asks me to do things I don't want to do, and she's really good at what she does. Like, I didn't know like what was like going on with me this last year, but I knew like, I was like, okay, what are the things I am doing and what are the things I'm not doing? And one of the things I wasn't doing anymore was like looking at myself in like an impartial space with somebody, objective, so to speak. And so I did that, and like the results have been like pretty immediate. Like, there's still a long way to go, but like I am much happier today than I was like 6 months ago, because I wasn't miserable, and I don't think I've had like any real miserable days in recovery, but I was definitely like in this point of like, what is the point, dude? Like, what am I even doing? And I've had that like several different times where it's like, does anything I do really matter? And then something will always happen where it's like, okay, like I'll see a sign or I'll work with an individual, and like I'll feel like I'm just hitting all the points and they're hitting all the points, and I'll be like, okay, this is why I do this. But sometimes it's just like, I have the same conversation with 8 different people, like for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And it's just like it's just like in the book. It's like if everybody would just do what I want them to do, everyone would be happier. But that's not like really the solution. That's like the disease talking.
And it may be the vast intelligence that you have gets bored.
I am always looking for like some sort of new challenge.
Right, for sure.
I mean, one of the big differences between me now and like me at the start of my journey is like now, oftentimes, like when something happens, my first thought is like, oh my God, everyone is stupid. Right. But back in the day, like that's where the thought ended. Now it's usually like, oh my God, everyone is stupid. But then I'm immediately like, that can't possibly be true. Right. Yeah. So like statistically speaking, that's not likely. So what is it actually? Right. Yeah. Like, what are we missing?
And what is my part?
Right. What's my part in it? Like, how do we make it better? Like, am I communicating this correctly? Am I missing something? Like, are they missing something? Like, collaboration is like a great resource.
What would you impart to somebody that was on their journey to recovery? Like somebody new or somebody that was on the fence or somebody that was questioning whether or not this could actually work for them?
I think that everything we know prevents us from learning everything we don't, right? And so when I'm boxed into this idea of what I know, it prevents me from learning these other things. And so like it talks about in the book where it says our old ideas were nil, like letting go of those old ideas. Like if I want to have new experiences and accomplish new things that seemed impossible, then I have to like let go of all the old ideas. Right. And I can piece them back together and see like how they fit correctly and where they apply and all of those things. But it's just like all the character defects served me in some way. Right. So when I look at them as like survival traits, right. So like if I used to lie, cheat and steal, right, it's because it served me a purpose. So how do I flip those things in God's world and like use them in a productive way? So like, but I have to be open to that first. Right. Like if I'm not open to it, it's like never going to happen. Like, I can't like force the door open for other people, but if it's open this much, like I can show them like the light that's creaking in through the door and be like, this shit gets better than like you ever thought it would. Like I never thought that I would accomplish any of these things. Like, I mean, I never thought that I would drive again. When I got here, I had 3 socks, 0 keys, owned nothing, had to beg my mom every week to like send me cigarettes, all those things. And now it's like, I can pretty much do anything I want to do, like I don't have to do anything today, but I sure do like get to do a lot of things.
Well, David, dude, thank you so much for being with us here today. You inspired a ton of people and you're going to continue to inspire and help a ton more. And I just thank you for your time and telling us about your family, your history, and spending the time with us this afternoon.
It's always a pleasure, Jason. Thank you for having me with you.
Thank you, everybody, for spending the time with us today. It's been a beautiful day. David is a beautiful spirit, beautiful soul, and I'm really glad that he graced his time with us today. So if you would, please like and subscribe. We want to keep bringing you good messaging, good content, good stories, and the truth at the end of the day. So thank you so much.